Everything you think you know about your own decisions is wrong. Not some of them. Not the occasional slip-up. Every single choice you made today, from what you had for breakfast to whether you opened this video, was influenced by a part of your brain you didn't even know was running the show. Neuroscientists at the Max Planck Institute proved that your brain makes a decision up to 7 seconds before you're consciously aware of it. 7 full seconds. That means by the time you decide something, the decision already happened. You're just the last one to find out, and that's not even the scary part. The scary part is that the same invisible machinery that picks your breakfast is also picking your career, your relationships, and the lies you tell yourself every single day. But here's the thing about self-sabotage that nobody talks about. It's not a bug. It's not a glitch. It's a feature. Your brain was literally designed to hold you back. And it's been doing it so well that you've spent your entire life thinking you were the one in charge. So why would evolution build a brain that works against itself? Simple math, really. For roughly 200,000 years, humans survived not by being ambitious, not by taking risks, and definitely not by chasing dreams. They survived by not dying. That's it. The entire operating system running inside your skull was optimized for one job. Keep this body alive long enough to reproduce. Everything else, your goals, your potential, your desire to finally start that business, or write that book, or leave that relationship that's slowly draining you. All of that is, from your brain's perspective, an unnecessary risk. Think about it this way. Imagine two early humans standing at the edge of an unfamiliar forest. One of them says, "There might be food in there. Let's explore." The other says, "Or there might be a predator. Let's stay here." Which one do you think had more grandchildren? The cautious one. Every single time. The explorers got eaten. The risk-takers got killed. And the ones who stayed put, who played it safe, who chose comfort over curiosity, they're the ones who eventually became us. Makes sense, right? But here's where things get interesting. That survival software never got an update. Your brain is running 200,000-year-old code in a world that changes every 6 months. And this mismatch between ancient programming and modern reality is responsible for almost every form of self-sabotage you've ever experienced. Not just the obvious ones. The hidden ones, too. The ones so deeply wired into your neurology that you've mistaken them for personality traits. Let's start with the most common one. Procrastination. The word gets thrown around like it's just laziness wearing a fancy hat, but the neuroscience tells a completely different story. When researchers at Ruhr University in Germany put chronic procrastinators into brain scanners, they found something nobody expected. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, was physically larger in people who procrastinate. Not a little larger. Measurably, significantly larger. The kind of difference that shows up clearly on a scan. Here's the thing about a bigger amygdala. It doesn't make you more anxious in the way most people understand anxiety. It doesn't give you sweaty palms or a racing heart, at least not at first. What it does is far more subtle. It makes you more sensitive to the emotional weight of tasks. When a non-procrastinator looks at a difficult project, their brain sees a task, just a thing to be done. When a chronic procrastinator looks at the same project, their brain sees a threat. The same part of their brain that would light up if a lion walked into the room lights up when they open a blank document or sit down to start a difficult conversation. So procrastination isn't laziness. It's fear. Specifically, it's your ancient brain interpreting the discomfort of a challenging task as a survival threat and doing what it was designed to do. Avoid it. Stay safe. Don't move. Wait for the danger to pass. The problem is, the danger is a spreadsheet, and it's not going anywhere. To move forward, the brain has to stop misfiring. It needs to recognize that the task isn't a threat, just information. And that shift only happens when mental noise drops and clarity comes back online. If you want to help your mind make that switch and break the avoidance loop, take a look at the brain song. It's a science-based method designed to pull the brain out of mental overload and restore real focus in just 12 minutes a day. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment. But that's not even the clever part. The clever part is what happens next. Because your brain doesn't just make you avoid the task, it makes you feel good about avoiding it. It rewards the avoidance. And this is where a neurotransmitter called dopamine enters the picture. And this is where most people get the story completely wrong. Everyone thinks dopamine is the pleasure chemical. It's in every pop science article, every motivational video, every wellness blog. Dopamine equals pleasure, right? Wrong. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It doesn't reward you for doing things. It rewards you for expecting to do things. And this distinction, this one small correction, changes everything about how self-sabotage works. When you procrastinate and switch to social media or a video game or even just reorganizing your desk, your brain gets a hit of dopamine. Not because those activities are genuinely rewarding, not because scrolling through your phone is actually fulfilling, but because they create tiny loops of anticipation and resolution. Scroll, find something interesting, brief satisfaction, scroll again. Your brain is essentially giving itself micro-treats for avoiding the thing it perceives as dangerous. Like a dog that learns to avoid the electric fence and gets a biscuit every time it turns around. Pretty clever, right? Except it gets worse. Much worse. Because now your brain has created an association. Difficult task equals threat. Avoidance equals reward. And the more you repeat this cycle, the stronger the neural pathway gets. Neuroscientists call this long-term potentiation, and it works exactly like a hiking trail through a forest. The first time you walk through, you're pushing past branches and tripping over roots. But every time you take the same path, it gets a little clearer, a little wider, a little easier to follow. After enough repetitions, procrastination stops being a choice and starts being a reflex. A superhighway in your brain. Your neural circuitry has literally rewired itself to avoid hard things. And it did it while making you think you were the one choosing Netflix over work. Sounds crazy, right? But this is where things get really dangerous. Because procrastination is just level 1 of self-sabotage. It's the warm-up act, the opening number. The real damage happens when the same ancient machinery starts messing with something far more fundamental. How you see yourself. And this part of the story is the one that keeps psychologists up at night. There's a phenomenon psychologists call identity protective cognition, and it might be the single most destructive force in human behavior. More destructive than addiction, more destructive than depression, more destructive than anything you'd expect, because it disguises itself as common sense. Here's how it works. Your brain doesn't just have beliefs, it has beliefs about who you are. And it protects those beliefs with the same ferocity, the same urgency, the same life or death intensity it would use to protect you from a physical attack. Let's say you've always identified as someone who's not good with money. Maybe you grew up hearing that. Maybe you had a few bad experiences that confirmed it. Doesn't matter how the identity formed. What matters is that once it's in place, it becomes part of your brain's operating system. Now, when an opportunity comes along that could change your financial situation, something strange happens, your brain doesn't see opportunity. It sees a threat to your identity. Because if you succeed with money, then who are you? If you were wrong about yourself this whole time, then what else are you wrong about? That's not just inconvenient. That's an existential crisis, and your brain would rather keep you broke than face it. This is why lottery winners go bankrupt at rates that would shock most people. Research from the National Endowment for Financial Education suggests that roughly 70% of people who receive a sudden windfall lose it within a few years. Not 7%. 70. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they can't do basic math. It's because their brains are actively, aggressively, relentlessly working to return them to the financial identity they've always known. Being broke feels familiar. Familiar feels safe. Safe is what your ancient brain wants, and it will burn through millions to get back there. Nobody tells you about this mechanism because it's almost too uncomfortable to accept. The idea that your own brain would sabotage your success just to maintain a comfortable self-image feels like a conspiracy theory about yourself. But the research is overwhelming, and it goes far beyond money. Dr. Claude Steele's groundbreaking work on stereotype threat showed that simply reminding students of negative stereotypes about their group before a test caused their performance to drop measurably. Not because they believed the stereotype, not because they internalized it, but because their brains were spending so much energy managing the emotional threat to their identity that there wasn't enough cognitive resource left for the actual task. The brain was so busy protecting the self that it forgot to help the self perform. And here's the really twisted part, the part that makes researchers uncomfortable. The smarter you are, the worse this gets. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people with higher cognitive ability were actually better at rationalizing their existing beliefs, not at finding truth. Let that sink in for a moment. Smart people don't use their intelligence to see reality more clearly. They use it to build more sophisticated, more convincing, more airtight arguments for why they're already right. The researchers called this motivated reasoning, and it works like this. When your brain encounters information that supports what you already believe, it gets processed quickly, easily, almost automatically. Feels true. Slides right in. No resistance. But when it encounters information that challenges your beliefs, a completely different system activates. Your prefrontal cortex lights up. Your critical thinking sharpens. Your analytical skills suddenly come online at full power. But not to evaluate the new information fairly, to destroy it, to pick it apart, to find every possible flaw. Your brain basically hires the world's best lawyer every time someone challenges your worldview, and that lawyer's only job is to find holes in the evidence. Makes sense from a survival standpoint. In a tribal environment, changing your beliefs could mean changing your alliances, and changing your alliances could mean exile, and exile meant death. But in the modern world, it means you can spend decades, entire lifetimes, defending a version of yourself that hasn't been accurate since high school. This is where things get tricky, though, because if your brain is working against you, and it's too smart to catch in the act, how do you fight back? How do you outsmart something that's literally you? Well, the first thing experienced psychologists will tell you is that you don't fight it. You can't fight it. Fighting your own brain is like arm wrestling yourself. You always win and lose at the same time. Instead, the research points to something much more counterintuitive, something that feels almost too simple. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called implementation intentions, developed by Dr. Peter Gollwitzer at New York University after decades of studying the gap between intention and action. And it might be the closest thing science has to a cheat code for the brain. The idea is absurdly simple. Laughably simple. Instead of setting a goal like, I'm going to exercise more, you create a specific if-then plan. If it is 7 in the morning on a weekday, then I will put on my running shoes and walk out the front door. Sounds too simple to work, right? Like something out of a self-help book you'd find at an airport. But the results are staggering. A meta-analysis of 94 independent studies found that implementation intentions had a medium to large effect on goal achievement across every domain tested, from health to academics to professional performance. People who used specific if-then plans were about 2.5 times more likely to succeed than people who just set goals with good intentions. Here's the thing about why this works. It's not about motivation. It's not about willpower. It's not about wanting it badly enough. It's about hijacking the same automatic system that's been sabotaging you. Remember those neural pathways that get stronger with repetition? The superhighways of avoidance? Implementation intentions create new ones. Instead of difficult task triggers avoidance, you're building specific cue triggers specific action. You're essentially reprogramming the reflex, overwriting old code with new code. And the beautiful part is that your ancient brain doesn't resist it, because you're not asking it to be brave or ambitious or different. You're just giving it a new if-then rule, which is exactly the kind of simple automatic programming it was built to run. You're speaking its language. You're working with the machine instead of against it. But this only solves one layer of the problem, because even if you overcome procrastination and start taking action, there's another trap waiting. And this one is so subtle, so well camouflaged, that most people spend their entire lives inside it without ever knowing it exists. It's called the arrival fallacy, a term coined by Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar during his years teaching the most popular course in Harvard's history, a course on happiness. And it explains why achieving your goals so often feels empty, hollow, like biting into a beautiful apple and finding sawdust inside. Here's how it works. Your brain's dopamine system, the same one that drives procrastination, also drives ambition. It creates a feeling of excitement and anticipation around future rewards. When I get the promotion, I'll be happy. When I lose the weight, I'll feel confident. When I make enough money, I'll finally relax. The problem is that dopamine is designed to shut off the moment you get what you want. The anticipation was the reward. The chase was the point. The achievement is just the signal for the dopamine to stop flowing. This is why the Monday after a big win often feels flat, empty, almost depressing. It's why people who achieve lifelong goals frequently describe feeling lost rather than fulfilled. The brain wasn't designed to be satisfied. Satisfaction is the enemy of survival. A satisfied caveman stops hunting, and a caveman who stops hunting becomes food. So your brain gives you just enough pleasure to reinforce the behavior, then immediately starts scanning for the next threat, the next goal, the next thing to chase. It's a treadmill, and the worst part is that most people respond to the emptiness by setting bigger goals, running faster, chasing harder, never realizing that the treadmill was the point all along, that the machine was never going to let them arrive. The weird part is that understanding this doesn't automatically fix it. Knowing that the treadmill is a treadmill doesn't make you stop running, but it does open the door to something researchers have been studying for the last 2 decades, and the findings are genuinely surprising. Dr. Kirk Brown and Dr. Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester conducted a series of studies on mindfulness, but not the meditation retreat, incense burning, crystals on the nightstand kind. The practical kind. The measurable kind. What they found was that people who scored higher on a simple mindfulness scale, meaning they were more aware of their present moment experience on a daily basis, showed significantly less activity in the default mode network of the brain. That's the network responsible for rumination, for mental time travel, for self-referential thinking, and crucially, for the identity-protective cognition that fuels self-sabotage. In other words, the simple act of paying attention to what's actually happening right now, rather than what your brain is telling you about what might happen, physically quiets the machinery of self-destruction, not permanently, not perfectly, but measurably, repeatedly, reliably. Here's the thing about that, though. Mindfulness gets talked about so much that the word has basically lost all meaning. It's been plastered on everything from apps to yoga pants to corporate retreat brochures. So let's be specific about what actually works, because the science is much more precise than the wellness industry would have you believe. A landmark study from Johns Hopkins University analyzed nearly 19,000 meditation studies, the largest review of its kind, and found that only 47 of them met rigorous scientific standards. Out of 19,000. That means over 99% of meditation research wasn't good enough to draw conclusions from. But of those 47 that were solid, the ones that showed real, measurable results had something in common. They all involved what researchers call focused attention practice, which is a fancy way of saying you pick one thing to pay attention to, your breath, a sound, a sensation, and keep bringing your mind back to it when it wanders. That's it. No mantras, no visualization, no special breathing techniques, no apps with ambient ocean sounds. Just the repeated act of noticing that your mind has wandered and bringing it back. Like a mental push-up. 30 minutes a day showed measurable changes in brain structure within 8 weeks, including increased gray matter density in regions associated with self-awareness, and decreased density in regions associated with stress. But even 10 minutes showed improvements in the ability to catch self-sabotaging thought patterns before they become self-sabotaging behaviors. And this is where things get really interesting, because catching the pattern is only half the battle. The other half is understanding what to do once you've caught it. And this is where most people get stuck, because every instinct they have tells them to do the wrong thing. There's a technique from acceptance and commitment therapy called cognitive diffusion, and it might be the most practical anti-self-sabotage tool that exists. More practical than journaling, more effective than positive affirmations, more powerful than most people realize. The idea is that most self-sabotaging thoughts get their power not from their content, but from our relationship to them. When your brain says, you're going to fail, and you believe it as a fact, as a prediction about the future delivered by a reliable source, it controls your behavior. But when your brain says you're going to fail, and you notice it as a thought, just a sentence produced by a pattern recognition machine running ancient software, something shifts. The thought loses its grip. Dr. Stephen Hayes, the creator of acceptance and commitment therapy, demonstrated this with an elegantly simple experiment. He had participants take a negative self-belief, something like, "I'm not good enough," something they'd been carrying around for years like a stone in their pocket, and repeat it out loud for 30 seconds straight. Just say the words over and over and over. What happened was remarkable. After about 15 seconds, the words stopped sounding like a meaningful statement and started sounding like nonsense. Like a word you've said so many times, it stops meaning anything. The emotional charge drained away. The thought that had been controlling their behavior for years suddenly sounded like what it was. A string of sounds with no more inherent truth than a car alarm going off at 3 in the morning. The participants didn't need to argue with the thought. They didn't need to replace it with a positive affirmation. They didn't need to convince themselves of anything. They just needed to experience it as a thought rather than as reality. And this distinction, this tiny perceptual shift, is what separates people who are controlled by their self-sabotage from people who can see it happening and choose differently. But let's be honest for a moment. Knowing all of this and actually doing something with it are two very different things. The gap between understanding and action is a canyon, and the bridge across it brings us to perhaps the most insidious form of self-sabotage of all. The one hiding in plain sight. It doesn't have an official name in the academic literature, but some psychologists informally call it productive avoidance, and it's the one that people who watch videos like this are most vulnerable to. Here's what it looks like. It's what happens when your brain uses the appearance of progress as a substitute for actual progress. Reading books about fitness instead of exercising. Watching videos about productivity instead of being productive. Learning about self-sabotage, understanding every mechanism, knowing every technique, instead of actually addressing your own patterns. Sound familiar? It should, because if you've watched this far without pausing to actually try anything, your brain is doing it right now. Your brain loves productive avoidance because it satisfies two needs at once. It gives you the dopamine hit of anticipation, the warm feeling that you're about to make a change, that change is just around the corner, while simultaneously keeping you safe from the actual risk of making one. You get to feel like you're moving forward while standing perfectly still, like running on that treadmill we talked about, but now with a motivational podcast playing in your headphones. One researcher I came across described it as the illusion of progress, and the data backs up just how prevalent it is. A study from the University of Scranton found that only 8% of people who set New Year's resolutions actually achieve them. But here's the detail that matters, the one that changes the whole picture. The other 92% didn't fail because they forgot about their goals. They didn't lose interest. They failed while actively engaging with them. They bought the gym membership. They downloaded the meal prep app. They read the articles. They watched the videos. They did everything except the thing that would actually create change. They prepared endlessly and executed never. The real secret is that your brain treats preparation as an acceptable substitute for action because, from a survival perspective, preparation is always safer than execution. Thinking about crossing the river is safer than actually crossing it. Planning to hunt the mammoth is safer than charging at it with a sharp stick. And so your brain rewards the planning, the researching, the organizing, the preparing, the watching, the reading, with just enough satisfaction to keep you from ever making the leap. Here's the thing about breaking this cycle, and this is where the science gets genuinely hopeful. It doesn't require massive change. It doesn't require a complete overhaul of who you are, or a dramatic reinvention or a spiritual awakening. It requires what behavioral scientists call micro-actions, and their effectiveness is almost embarrassingly well documented. Dr. B.J. Fogg at Stanford spent over 20 years studying behavior change, interviewing thousands of people, running hundreds of experiments, and his conclusion upended decades of motivational psychology. The key to changing behavior isn't motivation. It's not inspiration. It's not even discipline, that word everyone throws around like it's the answer to everything. It's making the desired behavior so small, so tiny, so ridiculously insignificant that it requires almost no effort to begin. Want to start exercising? Don't commit to an hour at the gym. Don't buy the expensive membership or the matching workout clothes. Commit to putting on your shoes. That's it. Just put the shoes on. Want to start writing? Don't promise yourself 1,000 words a day. Promise yourself one sentence, just one. Want to start meditating? Don't aim for 30 minutes on a cushion. Aim for one breath. One single, conscious breath. Pretty simple, right? Almost insultingly simple, like a joke someone's playing on you. But here's what the data shows, and this is where the simplicity becomes profound. Fogg's research found that people who started with microactions were significantly more likely to develop lasting habits than people who started with ambitious goals. And the reason goes right back to the ancient brain. A tiny action doesn't trigger the threat response. Putting on your shoes doesn't feel dangerous. Writing one sentence doesn't feel overwhelming. Taking one breath doesn't feel like a commitment. Your amygdala stays quiet. Your avoidance pathways stay dormant. The ancient machinery stays asleep. And the moment you complete that tiny action, something remarkable happens. You've created momentum. Your brain registers the completion of a task, releases a small hit of dopamine, the real kind, the kind that comes from actual accomplishment rather than anticipation. And suddenly, doing the next tiny thing feels natural, almost automatic. One sentence becomes a paragraph. One breath becomes 5 minutes. Putting on shoes becomes a walk around the block, becomes a jog, becomes a run. Not because you forced it, not because you gritted your teeth and pushed through, but because your brain's own reward system started working for you instead of against you. You didn't fight the machinery, you hacked it. You used its own rules to rewrite the program. But even this isn't the whole picture. There's one more layer of self-sabotage that runs deeper than procrastination, deeper than identity protection, deeper than the arrival fallacy or productive avoidance. It sits at the very bottom of the stack, beneath everything else. And it's the one that almost nobody talks about, probably because it's the hardest one to face. It's the sabotage that comes from being afraid of success itself. This sounds like a contradiction, right? Like saying someone is afraid of water while swimming. Why would anyone be afraid of the thing they want? But Dr. Gay Hendricks, in his extensive research on what he calls the upper limit problem, found that almost everyone has an internal thermostat for how much success, happiness, and fulfillment they'll allow themselves to experience. An invisible ceiling, a line they won't let themselves cross. Go above that setting, and your brain will find a way, sometimes creative, sometimes brutal, to bring you back down. Here's how it shows up in real life. A relationship starts going really well, better than anything you've experienced before, and suddenly you pick a fight over something you don't even care about. A project at work starts gaining momentum, real momentum, the kind where people are noticing, and you miss a crucial deadline or send an email to the wrong person. You get an unexpected compliment, and instead of accepting it, you immediately think of 3 reasons you don't deserve it. These aren't random events. They aren't bad luck. They aren't proof that you're cursed. They're corrections. Your brain is pulling you back to the level it considers safe. Like a thermostat clicking on when the room gets too warm. And the reason is, once again, rooted in evolutionary logic that made perfect sense 100,000 years ago. In a tribal environment, standing out was dangerous. The member of the tribe who had too much, who was too successful, who rose too far above the group, became a target. For jealousy, for theft, for aggression, for exile. The safest position in a tribe wasn't at the top, it was in the middle. Visible enough to belong, to be part of the group, to have allies, but not so visible that you attracted the wrong kind of attention. Your brain still operates on this logic. Every time you start to exceed your internal thermostat setting, every time you push past the invisible ceiling, alarm bells go off. Not loud, dramatic alarm bells that you'd recognize as fear. Quiet, subtle ones. A vague sense of unease you can't quite name. An impulse to check your phone during a deep, meaningful conversation. A sudden urge to eat something unhealthy after a week of clean eating. A nagging thought that says, "This is going too well. Something bad is about to happen. You don't deserve this." The weird part is that most people experience this their entire lives and never connect the dots. They think they're unlucky. They think they have a pattern of messing up good things. They think there's something fundamentally wrong with them. Some deep character flaw that keeps pulling them back. But there isn't. There's just a very old, very powerful piece of software doing exactly what it was programmed to do. Keep you safe by keeping you average. And this is where everything we've talked about comes together. Because once you understand that self-sabotage isn't a personal failing, but a biological mechanism, a feature of hardware that hasn't been updated in 200,000 years, the whole game changes. The entire framing shifts. You stop asking what's wrong with me, and start asking what is my brain trying to protect me from. And that question, that single shift in perspective, that one small reframe, opens up every tool we've discussed. Implementation intentions give your brain new automatic pathways to replace the old ones. Mindfulness lets you catch the sabotage in real time before it becomes action. Cognitive diffusion takes the power out of self-defeating thoughts by showing you they're just thoughts. Micro-actions sneak past the threat response like a Trojan horse. And understanding the upper limit problem lets you gradually, patiently, compassionately raise your internal thermostat, not by fighting your brain, not by overpowering it with willpower, but by showing it, one small success at a time, that it's safe to have more. That the tribe isn't going to exile you. That success isn't the predator it thinks it is. None of this happens overnight. The neural pathways that drive self-sabotage were built over years, sometimes decades, of repetition. They're superhighways in your brain, and they're not going to dissolve because you read about them or watched a video about them. That would just be another form of productive avoidance, wouldn't it? Another way to feel like you're making progress while standing still. The real change starts the same way every lasting change starts. Not with a grand resolution. Not with a burst of motivation that fades by Thursday. Not with a complete understanding of the science. It starts with one tiny action taken right now, in this moment, in the face of every ancient instinct telling you to wait. Telling you tomorrow is better. Telling you that you need more information first. Telling you that you're not ready yet. And now, at least, you know exactly why your brain is saying that. The question isn't whether it will keep saying it. It will. The machinery doesn't stop. The question is, now that you can hear it for what it is, what are you going to do about it?